Daniel is 62. He retires with $850,000. His house is paid off. His car is paid off. His spending looks manageable. And like many people at this stage, he believes the hard part is behind him. He is not trying to fund an extravagant retirement. He is not planning luxury travel. He is not carrying major consumer debt. He simply wants a steady life, supported by a disciplined portfolio and Social Security. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, but one variable changes the structure almost immediately. Not in year 15, not after a market crash, not after a long-term care event. In year 1, that variable is healthcare. More specifically, retiring before Medicare while drawing from a portfolio that already has limited margin for error. So the real question is not whether $850,000 sounds like enough. The real question is this: what did retiring at 62 with his healthcare structure change over the next 10, 15, and 25 years? Let's model it carefully, because in retirement, the decision itself matters less than the long-term pressure it creates. We will use two paths. The first is a baseline path: average market behavior, moderate inflation, healthcare costs that rise, but without a major early disruption, some flexibility in spending if needed. The second is a stress path: higher healthcare costs from the beginning, a moderate medical event in early retirement, weak market returns in the first 2 years, and a spending plan that does not adjust quickly enough. Same retiree, same starting balance, same retirement age, very different long-term outcome. Now, let's build the foundation. Daniel wants to spend $72,000 per year after retiring. That includes property taxes, food, utilities, insurance, transportation, home upkeep, and normal discretionary spending. Nothing excessive, just a stable household budget. He also decides to claim Social Security at 62. Let's estimate that benefit at about $2,100 per month. That is $25,200 per year before taxes. So if Daniel wants $72,000 in annual spending and Social Security provides $25,200, the rest has to come from his portfolio. That gap is $46,800. Now on paper, many people stop right there and think the plan is workable. $46,800 divided by $850,000 is roughly a 5.5% withdrawal rate. That already sits above the classic 4% guideline many retirees use as a reference point. Not proof of failure, but not much room for complacency either. And this is before taxes on withdrawals are fully considered. Because if part of Daniel's retirement money is in tax-deferred accounts, the gross withdrawal usually has to be higher than the net cash he wants to spend. Let's assume a modest effective tax drag means Daniel needs closer to $50,000 out of portfolio to support that $46,800 gap cleanly. Now the withdrawal rate is closer to 5.9%. Still manageable in a strong market. Still survivable if spending remains flexible, but structurally tighter than it first appeared. Now add the first distortion. Daniel is 62. He is not yet on Medicare. That means healthcare is not just another line in the budget. It is one of the largest moving parts in the early retirement model. A lot of people think of healthcare as a premium, but retirement healthcare is never just a premium. It is premiums. It is deductibles. It is prescriptions. It is specialist visits. It is testing. It is follow-up treatment. And in many cases, it rises faster than general inflation. Let's say Daniel originally assumes healthcare will cost around $900 per month between premiums and routine out-of-pocket spending. That would be $10,800 per year. Meaningful but manageable. But the actual cost lands closer to $1,600 per month once the full structure is included. That is $19,200 per year, a difference of $8,400 in year 1 alone. That extra cost does not arrive while Daniel is still earning a salary. It arrives after the salary is stopped. So now the portfolio withdrawal is not $50,000. It is approaching $58,000 to $59,000. That pushes the effective withdrawal rate into the high 6% range. And this happens before any major medical event, before inflation compounds, before the market does anything helpful or unhelpful. This is the first financial distortion. Daniel did not retire recklessly, but he retired into a cost structure that raises withdrawal pressure from the very beginning. And once the starting withdrawal rate rises, the next 10 to 25 years become much more sensitive to sequence risk, inflation, and healthcare inflation. That is where the long-term divergence begins. Now let's project the two paths. In the baseline path, Daniel experiences average long-run returns near 6% annually after fees, moderate inflation around 3%, and healthcare inflation closer to 5%. His withdrawals rise gradually, but he remains somewhat flexible during weaker years. In the stress path, Daniel faces weak first-year and second-year returns, elevated healthcare costs from the start, and one moderate medical event that adds irregular out-of-pocket costs in the early retirement window. His spending does not adjust quickly, so the portfolio absorbs most of the pressure. Let's begin with the first 10 years. By age 72, in the baseline scenario, Daniel's portfolio may still hold somewhere around $680,000 to $720,000, depending on the exact return sequence and tax structure. The important point is not the precise dollar. The important point is that the portfolio remains intact enough to support later retirement years with caution, but not panic. Now compare that with the stress scenario. By age 72, the portfolio may have fallen closer to $480,000 to $530,000. That is not a minor difference. That is a gap of roughly $150,000 to $200,000 by year 10. Same retirement date, same starting balance, same basic lifestyle goal, different pressure path. And in retirement, a $200,000 difference is not just a number on a statement. It changes daily behavior. It changes whether home maintenance is delayed. It changes whether travel feels routine or irresponsible. It changes whether market decline feels temporary or threatening. It changes whether a retiree is living comfortably or living defensively. This is why the first decade matters so much. If early retirement begins with elevated withdrawals and weak returns, later compounding works on a smaller capital base. That means even normal spending becomes progressively heavier. Now move to year 15. Daniel is 77. At this stage, healthcare costs are rarely lower. In most cases, they are higher, and often materially higher than general inflation alone would suggest. If general inflation averages 3%, an expense doubles in roughly 24 years. But if healthcare-related costs grow at 5%, they double much faster. That differential matters because retirement spending is not static. One category can rise faster than the rest and quietly reshape the whole budget. By year 15, in the baseline scenario, Daniel's portfolio might still sit around $580,000 to $630,000. Not untouched, not perfectly safe, but still carry enough capital to support the next phase of retirement if spending remains disciplined. In the stress scenario, year 15 may look very different. The portfolio could be closer to $320,000 to $390,000. At that point, the same dollar withdrawal becomes far more dangerous because it is being drawn from a much smaller base. That is where distortion accelerates. A higher withdrawal rate in the first years does not only reduce the portfolio, it reduces the portfolio's future earning power. And once healthcare keeps raising the spending floor, the retiree has less flexibility than the raw balance suggests. Now let's layer in Social Security timing. Daniel claimed at 62. That gave him income sooner, which helped cash flow in the early years. But the trade-off is a permanently lower monthly benefit for life. If Daniel had delayed claiming to 67, his monthly benefit might have been closer to $3,200 rather than $2,100. That is a difference of around $1,100 per month, or $13,200 per year. That matters because guaranteed income is structurally different from portfolio income. A higher Social Security benefit reduces the need to sell assets in down markets. It lowers the portfolio withdrawal burden, and it stays with the retiree for life, adjusted for cost of living changes. So what changed when Daniel retired at 62 and claimed early? He reduced the waiting period, but he also locked in lower guaranteed income precisely when higher healthcare costs were pressuring the portfolio. This is the midpoint modeling question. If your healthcare costs were $8,000 to $12,000 higher than expected for the first 5 years of retirement, would your current plan still work without forcing a higher withdrawal rate or an earlier Social Security claim? That is not an emotional question. It is a structural one. And many plans that look acceptable in a static spreadsheet become fragile when tested that way. Now extend the model to year 20 and year 25. At age 82, the baseline path may still support Daniel with portfolio in a range of $450,000 to $520,000. Again, not abundance, not excess, but a workable retirement structure if spending stayed controlled and no major long-term care event emerged. In the stress path, by age 82, the portfolio may be approaching depletion risk. It might stand near $120,000 to $220,000, or in some sequences, it may already be effectively exhausted. That is the core answer to the channel's central question. What did this decision change over 20 years? It changed Daniel's exposure. It changed his margin. It changed the difference between a retirement that remained stable and one that became increasingly fragile. Now take it to year 25. Daniel is 87. In the baseline path, he may still have $280,000 to $380,000 available, depending on return order, taxation, and spending discipline. In the stress path, there may be little or nothing left beyond Social Security and whatever cash reserve survived. That is a long-term divergence, not a few uncomfortable years. A structural gap that widens over time because the early distortion kept compounding. This is why retirement modeling cannot stop at year 10. A plan may look acceptable in the near term and still become vulnerable in the later decades, particularly when healthcare inflation runs higher than general inflation and withdrawals begin above a comfortable range. Now, let's add another layer, withdrawal flexibility. One of the most important guardrails in retirement is the ability to reduce discretionary withdrawals during weak market years. That does not solve everything, but often slows damage when sequence risk appears early. Suppose Daniel reduced discretionary spending by $6,000 to $8,000 during the first 2 weak years. That might not feel dramatic in lifestyle terms, but in portfolio terms, it could preserve tens of thousands of dollars later because less capital is removed when markets are already down. This is the discipline many retirees underestimate. The portfolio is not only shaped by average return, it is shaped by what gets withdrawn when it gets withdrawn and whether those withdrawals remain rigid when conditions worsen. Now add tax structure. If much of Daniel's money sits in traditional IRA or 401k assets, every extra dollar withdrawn for healthcare may require an even larger gross withdrawal to produce the net spending amount he needs. That means healthcare pressure often arrives with tax pressure attached. This is also where future required minimum distributions can complicate planning, especially if tax brackets or Medicare income-related premiums become part of the picture later. Higher taxable withdrawals can affect more than just annual tax due. They can interact with Medicare costs through IRMA thresholds once the retiree is enrolled. So the interaction is important. Higher healthcare costs can raise withdrawals. Higher withdrawals can raise taxable income. Higher taxable income can increase future Medicare-related costs. And the cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Now consider longevity. If Daniel lives at 87, this model is already relevant. If he or his spouse lives into the early 90s, the baseline path remains strained but survivable, while the stress path becomes much more severe. Longevity is not a side case. It is central to retirement planning because the risk is not only dying early with money left over. The risk is living longer than the original model could comfortably support. And that is why the emotional experience of retirement changes long before the money is technically gone. A retiree with a shrinking margin behaves differently. He delays repairs. He watches markets more closely. He becomes more hesitant about family support, travel, or even routine spending. Retirement starts to feel conditional. That psychological consequence matters, because a fragile plan does not have to fail completely to reduce quality of life. It only has to create enough uncertainty that every decision feels heavier. Daniel thought $850,000 represented security. What he eventually discovered was that the number itself was not the whole issue. The real issue was what the number had to carry once health care, tax drag, early claiming, and market variability were layered onto it. So what are the practical lessons? First, before retiring, model healthcare as its own system. Do not bury it inside general living expenses, separate premiums, deductibles, prescriptions, and realistic out-of-pocket ranges. Then stress test those costs for the first 5 years, especially before Medicare eligibility. Second, before claiming Social Security early, compare the short-term cash flow benefit against a long-term reduction in guaranteed income. An earlier claim can help immediate cash flow, but it can also increase lifetime portfolio dependence. That trade-off should be modeled, not assumed. Third, during volatile early retirement years, adjust discretionary spending where possible. Rigid withdrawals during weak markets create disproportionate damage. Flexibility is not a sign of failure. It is a portfolio preservation tool. Fourth, model retirement using both a baseline scenario and a stress scenario. Average return assumptions alone are not enough. You need to see what happens if weak returns and higher healthcare costs arrive together, because they sometimes do. Fifth, run the model past age 85, preferably to 90. A plan that works for 10 years may still become unstable over 25, and the later years are often the years with the least flexibility. Now step back to the larger question. Was $850,000 enough for Daniel to retire? Under one set of conditions. Perhaps yes. Under another, clearly not with much comfort. That is the important distinction. Retirement is rarely determined by one number alone. It is determined by the structure around that number. Income timing, withdrawal rate, tax drag, healthcare inflation, market sequence, longevity. Daniel's mistake was not that he failed to save. His mistake was assuming the portfolio would carry the same meaning after retirement that it carried before retirement. But once the paycheck stops, every hidden variable becomes heavier, and healthcare is one of the heaviest variables of all. By year 10, the decision had changed his margin. By year 15, it had changed his flexibility. By year 20 to 25, it had changed the difference between continued stability and potential depletion. That is what this retirement decision changed over time. Not just a number on paper, a whole range of future choices. And that is why calm retirement planning needs more than optimism. It needs modeling. It needs stress testing. And it needs the willingness to examine the variables that are easiest to underestimate while still working. The purpose of this kind of analysis is not to create fear. It is to improve decisions while there is still time to improve them. So here is the closing question. If you were in Daniel's position, with $850,000 at age 62, would you still retire immediately and accept the healthcare and withdrawal pressure? Or would you delay the decision to strengthen